So I'm Ewan. So a little bit of history about me, I guess. So I've been in this Your Party stuff since the start. I was on the executive committee of DSYP for a time, currently on the steering committee of Your Party Youth and Students, and I'm also helping with the members charter, which I think is a very good initiative. And if you haven't, you should probably sign it. But I hope you already have. What is to be done with your party? So I've deliberately borrowed this title. Lenin's pamphlet posed an organizational question for a revolutionary movement that had reached the limits of what its existing forms could carry. So I suppose the question here is narrower. In some ways, it's more uncomfortable because it's posed not to the movement in general, but to the people who are in this room. So people who have joined your party, who have invested in it, who in many cases have paid real costs to it, the question is what you do now. And I want to be clear about what this talk is and what it's not. So it's not a post-mortem. A post-mortem assumes that the patient is dead and that the analysis is retrospective. Now, I'm going to argue that what happened in February is not a death, but a clarification. And that clarifications, if read correctly, are more politically useful than the illusions that they dispel. It's also not a comfort. If you came here hoping that organisation and democratic process can still turn the organisation in a different direction, I'm going to disappoint you. So the argument I'm going to make is that the organisation's character has been determined and that the determination is not reversible through the processes available. And that the most politically serious thing that your party can do, the left wing of your party, is to recognise that fact and act on it. So this talk is an argument for a split, not an angry split, not a demoralised scatter, not a series of individual departures as the provocations from the centre accumulate. I am arguing for a deliberate, politically prepared, organisationally conscious split carried out at the moment of the left's choosing rather than the centre's, producing a party rather than a protest. I'm going to try to make the case for that as precisely as I can. And I believe that the case begins with an honest account of what your party actually is. So, your party is not a socialist party. I would ask that you begin with the name. A party that cannot decide what to call itself has not yet decided what it is. The membership chose at the founding conference the emptiest option available among a selection of the emptiest options that the centre could think of to drive people towards it. It's really illustrative of the rest of the process. It's not really an accident of branding. It's the organisation's political situation expressed through its nomenclature. You can tell that by the time the founding conference had arrived, there was no positive content available that a majority could agree to put to a name. And so the name that won was the one that demanded the least of everybody. So your party is not a party in any theoretically serious sense of the term. I want to be precise about this because the claim is sometimes heard as an insult, a way of dismissing the organisation and the people who built it. It's not. It's a descriptive statement about what the organisation actually is. So a party in the Marxist tradition is an organisation constituted around a programme, a positive political agreement about what the class needs, what the historical situation demands, and what the organisation therefore exists to do. Your party doesn't have a programme. It has founding documents that defer every substantive political question to future political processes that have not yet been specified because they will never happen. It was constituted not around a positive political agreement, but around a shared condition, that is, the expulsion from the Labour Party by figures whose politics had become incompatible with the Starmer settlement. So that shared condition is real. The anger that's produced it is legitimate. Obviously, we're all angry at Starmer, but a shared exclusion is not a programme. It's the precondition for a programme. And what we failed to do, and what the question that the founding process had to answer, is whether that precondition would be converted into genuine political content. That wasn't answered because it could not have been answered honestly by both of the tendencies at the organisation centre. And this is why I'd like to be direct, because obviously you were there for it. The founding contradiction of your party is not a clash of personalities. I know it's expressed itself as one with remarkable consistency, and I know that for many of you, the experience of the last year has been inseparable from the specific behaviour of specific individuals. But the behaviour is the expression of something structural, not its cause. The founding contradiction is the clash between two entirely different conceptions of what the organisation exists to do. For one tendency, the purpose has always been legible in practice. The continuation of the Corbynite parliamentary presence beyond expulsion from Labour. The maintenance of a vehicle through which the Labour movement's existing left apparatus, that is, its trade union relationships. Think Len McCluskey, whose wife is, I'm not sure if she's his wife, but his partner is very closely involved with this process. The parliamentary infrastructure, the networks of kind of full-timers and former advisors as movement administrators, can they preserve electoral relevance and organisational continuity? That is what the Corbyn wing is looking at. Now, the horizon is not particularly socialist. It's redistributive. It's parliamentarian. It takes the existing state form as a given and it asks what a left government might do with it. So for the other tendency, the organisation was something else. It was the possibility, not yet realised, of a genuinely socialist formation with a programme grounded in the actual composition of the class, a serious account of imperialism, and a political horizon that is not bounded by what purely parliamentary action can deliver. So these two conceptions are not just in tension, they're incompatible. You know, a formation organised around the continuation of parliamentary Corbynism and a formation organised around the construction of a socialist programme adequate to the present cannot be in the same formation. Everything that has happened since July, you know, the chaotic launch, the membership disputes, the expulsions, the slates, the row, it's not a series of unfortunate events. It's a single political argument conducted through organisational means whose conclusion was delivered in February. The question this talk addresses is what the losing side has to do with that conclusion. So, February was not the moment that things went wrong. I want to insist on this because the story that the left wants to tell itself is about what happened matters enormously for what it does next. Now, the temptation is to reach to betrayal. So, you know, the bureaucracy, the apparatus, it was all worked against us. It was rigged. You know, they out-organised us. And all of this is true as far as it goes. But the rule changes, barring members of other political organisations, you know, the expulsions, the post-election invention of the parliamentary leader position, they're real. But to rest the analysis there is to mistake the instruments for the cause and to leave the left with the story about what happened. They'll make it harder and not easier to understand what it is actually facing. The Corbyn wing didn't actually betray a programme it once held. It executed the one it always had. So this is the main charge that I want to levy against the Corbyn wing. And that's because it's not the charge that's usually made. The charge that's usually made is one of betrayal, that, you know, the Corbyn leadership was once radical and it became moderate under pressure. And that's what happened in the Labour years. And it represented a series of capitulations to the right that a more determined leadership would have avoided, and that the apparatus now controlling your party has abandoned the politics it once shared with the actual left. And this charge is false, and its falseness is important. Jeremy Corbyn, for all his faults, is not a traitor to the politics he once held. He's a figure whose politics have been entirely consistent across 50 years of Labour movement activity. His formation took place within the Labour Party and the trade union left. His conception of socialist politics was shaped by the Labour Party and the trade union left. You know, and it proved under pressure to be definitive. He cannot change from that. The 2015 moment didn't necessarily radicalise Corbyn. It simply elevated him to a position where he could express those politics. And that elevation was mistaken by many on the left to be a transformation that never really occurred. What the Corbyn movement produced, through no dishonesty on its part, was a left that invested its energy and hope in a vehicle whose driver has never shared its destination with us. And the vehicle has now reached the destination its driver always intended, which is a modest parliamentary presence, organisationally controlled by the Labour movement's existing left apparatus, capable of maintaining electoral relevance on the margins of the political system. So, the title that my article that kind of kicked all of this off was woe to the gravediggers. And this is a reference to the Communist Manifesto's argument that the bourgeoisie produces its own gravediggers, that by executing its historical role with perfect consistency, it prepares the conditions for what supersedes it. The charge against the Corbyn wing is the same in its structure. It didn't set out to bury the possibility that your party briefly contained, but the manifesto's charge, it doesn't require intent, it requires consequence. And they have executed their role with a perfect consistency. And what they have buried, the process of building exactly what they always set out to build, is the possibility of something genuinely different. And the question now is not who draws that consequence, not who assigns the blame. That's a political dead end. But who looks at what February clarified and decides to build from the clarification rather than resign themselves to mourning, to scatter back to localism, to go back to the sects. The energy that went into your party was real. The people who joined it in the belief that it might become something serious, they weren't naive. The founding moment contained a genuine political possibility. They didn't create that possibility. They used it. They organised within it. They drew on its energy. They allowed a left wing to invest in an organisation on the basis of prospectus that they could not honour, and they have now buried it. The name on the headstone is theirs. It is your party. It is Jeremy's party. But headstones are not programmes. And the left's task is now not to stand at the grave. It is to recognise that the clarification February delivered is, read correctly, the precondition for building something the founding process of your party never could have produced. A formation constituted around a genuine political agreement rather than a shared condition of exclusion. Now, the argument is what the rest of this talk will make. So, the demand for unity will be made, and it's likely already being made in the conversation happening around this talk, and the messages being sent between people. It's made in language of the movement, of solidarity, of the urgency, of the political moment, of the dangers of the fragmentation that are of a left that can afford it least. And it will invoke the enemies waiting to benefit from the division. Look at the Labour Party, look at Reform. If we stand divided, how can we unite against this threat? And, it will appeal to the shared history of the people who built your party together, to, the relationships that we formed together on, the picket lines, at protests, in the Labour Party, and to the personal costs paid by people who left Labour. They staked their political futures on this formation. And, these appeals, they're not cynical. Many of the people who make them are entirely sincere. And that's precisely why this argument needs to be answered directly rather than dismissed out of hand. So unity is not a political virtue in the abstract. It's a virtue relative to purpose. That is to say, a unity that papers over a programmatic chasm does not preserve the possibility of realising either programme. It ensures that neither is realised, while the organisational form absorbs the energy that might otherwise go into building something coherent. So this is not a theoretical proposition. It's the description of what the left wing has already lived through in your party, and before that in the Labour Party, and before that in every iteration of the same argument that's been used to keep the radical wing of the Labour movement inside formations whose purpose was to contain it. The unity argument has a history, and that history is not encouraging. Now, I want to be honest about the deeper cost here, because I think it's a cost that's less often named. The bearable costs of remaining are real, and that will be continued factional attrition, bureaucratic harassment, having your political positions managed and constrained by an apparatus whose interests they threaten. And the left has borne these costs in worse conditions. They're not the argument. The deeper cost is the political argument. It's the cost of conducting your politics within a framework that has been explicitly defined against the content those politics require. Every intervention made from within your party after this February is an intervention made on the train the Corbyn wing controls, in the language the Corbyn wing sets, towards goals the Corbyn wing will determine are compatible with the organisation's direction. You will not transform that framework by operating within it. You will legitimise it. You will provide the organisational pluralism that allows the formation to present itself as a broad socialist party, rather than what the CEC result revealed it to be, which is the Jeremy Corbyn party. And this is the precise sense in which remaining after February is a political choice rather than a neutral continuation of existing activity. It's a choice to provide cover for a project that has defined itself against you in exchange for a platform whose terms are to be set by those who have just defeated you. The left wing is being asked to be the evidence of your party's radicalism, while the apparatus ensures that that radicalism goes nowhere. The demand for unity in this context is not a demand for solidarity. It is a demand that the left wing agrees to its own political neutralization and that it must call that agreement comradeship. And I do not think that you think that you should accept this demand. Now, second to last slide. I think I'm doing good time. So, to understand what the split is for, I think it's necessary to be precise about what each tendency actually is. So the political tendencies that have contested your party's character are not arbitrary factional alignments produced by the ambitions of their respective leaders. They're the organizational expressions of two distinct social forces with the distinct relationships to the existing order, with distinct political horizons and distinct interests in what a left formation should do and become. You know, Corbyn Wing's social base is legible in its apparatus, let's be honest. You know, Carrie Murphy, Len McCluskey, Laura Smith, the PJP, the constellation of the former advisors, the trade union officials, the regional organisers, the movement administrators who staffed the Corbyn leadership and remained throughout the Labour years and the expulsion and the founding of your party, the organisational core of this tendency. It's not a random collection of individuals, it's a specific layer in the labour movement. It's the bureaucracy, it's the political formation that took place inside Labour, inside the trade unions, those whose careers and networks and political identities are bound up with these institutions, and whose conception of socialist politics is defined by the horizon these institutions make visible. That horizon, once again, redistributive, parliamentarian. It takes the existing state form as a given. It will treat trade union officialdom as the natural leadership of the labour movement. It is suspicious of a politics that cannot be translated into electoral terms, not from cynicism, but from a genuine conviction formed on decades of practice that electoral politics is where power is contested and won. So it's not to say that this tendency is not coherent. You know, it has a social base, it has an apparatus, it has an implicit programme. It is what the Corbyn years were built off of. You know, and the question is it now capable of exercising pressure on and eventually participating in government? Now, it is politically marginal in the present conjecture. It's inadequate, and that distinction matters enormously. You know, an incoherent project cannot be argued out of its position, and an inadequate one has to be superseded by something that can do what it cannot. And that's what the task is. You know, we need to supersede the bureaucratic left of Labour. We need to supersede the unions, not necessarily to replace them, but to introduce new forms of working, to introduce a new politics, to radicalise, to build towards left that is able to contest power, not only on the terms of parliamentarianism, but on the terms that the working class sets. Finally, the deepest illusion in your party is the treatment of a programme as a list of demands rather than the crystallisation from the actual experience of class struggle. And I believe this is the main issue that perhaps the left tendency of grassroots left may have had, which is that we refused to talk about politics. We refused to perform actual analysis of the class. We reproduced the same document that the left has set out for every, kind of internal election in the past, 50 to 100 years. And I think that all that does is it just produces a more radical version of the existing left, which, as I have already said, is inadequate. So, finally, I'd like to be direct about what I'm proposing and what I'm not. So, I'm not proposing that the left wing of your party walks out in anger the next time that the centre does something outrageous if they endorse another bunch of Tories, because it will do something outrageous and the provocation will come and it will be real and the impulse will be to leave immediately and to refuse to remain in an organisation that treats its members this way, and that will be understandable. It will also be as a guide to action politically disastrous. The history of the British left so far is littered with the product of that impulse. That is to say, individuals and small groups leaving in anger after the latest outrage, without prior consolidation, without agreed programme, without the organisational continuity that makes the departure into something rather than nothing. You know, you've got sectlets, you've got the discussion circles, which each carries the wound of the rupture that produced it, rather than the political content that might have made it viable. That's not what I'm proposing. What I'm proposing begins with a prior act. The conscious constitution of the left wing as a political tendency before the formal break. We need a caucus with an agreed minimum programme content organised across the branches that remain accessible to it, capable of acting with a collective discipline rather than a loose network of individuals who share a general political orientation. So the deliberate construction of the relationships, the communication, and the political agreements that a new formation will require, built while those involved are still inside the existing structures and before the pressures of departure have fragmented them. It's not an event, split's not an event, it's a process. And the process, I would say, has already begun. The left wing's choice is not between splitting or not splitting. It's the choice between the splits, the prepared, it's politically coherent, it's productive of something or other, and a split that is reactive, demoralised, it's productive of nothing. And the apparatus will force the latter if the left wing does not choose the former. We have already seen this. They've begun to expel socialists. They have declared that your organisation is null and void. You are not permitted within the party. And they put it within an invitation. It's ridiculous. But the new formation has to be a party or it is nothing. I would like us to dwell on this because the temptation is to adopt a looser form, and that will be, in the most reasonable language imaginable, it will be disastrous. A broad front, a platform, a coalition, which unites forces across a programmatic difference, that appeals broader, that avoids the exclusions that a party with the programme necessarily involves, is something that has to be resisted. A party of 3,000 people with a coherent programme and a serious account of what's being built is more politically significant than a broad front of 15,000 who agrees on nothing except that Stalin was bad. The broad front cannot carry a programme. It cannot develop a political tendency. It cannot do the work of a political formation that the present situation requires. The temptation to adopt it is the first form the parliamentary garrity takes in a post-split formation, and it should be refused at the founding and not negotiated with after the fact. So, I would like to close with, the gravedigger charge that Marx made, because I think it contains the answers to the question that the talk poses. So, Marx's argument is not that the bourgeoisie falls. It is that the bourgeoisie succeeds, that by executing its historical role with perfect consistency, it prepares the conditions for what supersedes it. The Corbyn wing has executed its role. It has built, with considerable skill and organisational discipline, exactly what it has always set out to build. In doing so, it has clarified, with a precision that the founding process of your party never could have produced, what the left wing is actually facing and what it actually needs. The clarification is not a defeat. It is the precondition for something honest. A split carried out with discipline and political seriousness, producing a party with a coherent programme grounded in the actual composition of the class, is not a defeat dressed as a beginning. It is the beginning. They have done their work. The question that the left must inherit from February is not how to reverse the result inside your party. It's what to build from the clarification that result provides. Left has deferred that question long enough. We have refused to talk politics. We must now. We must. The climate is dying. The far right is rising, and we refuse to talk. We refuse to unite, and we refuse to. We must not retreat, is what I'm saying. We need to fight for the class, for the party, for the world. That's why we need to split. Thank you.